Ben Shapiro recorded this segment where, I don't know if this is for his Daily Wire show or whatever, but he went and sat down with a bunch of, I don't know how old these kids are, maybe kindergarten age, I would guess, or maybe a little bit older than that. He sits down with these kids, and he is going to teach them politics. I mean, that's hilarious. He is not a trustworthy source. He's obviously a very partisan person. He's very tribal. He's a hardcore Republican. And he thinks that he doesn't have biases. He thinks that he's somehow objective, even though it's demonstrably the case that, of course, he's biased in that direction. He's going to get checked here by a child. A child is going to check him. So this is fun. This is interesting. Let's watch, and then I'll respond to a lot of the things that he says.
Government is what takes all of your money and gives you very little in return.
That is not true.
Okay, that's kind. I mean, it's kind of true. It depends on the kind of government. Yeah, that is what taxes are for. But taxes are theft, children. Taxes are the government takes a part of the money that you spend, or the money that you earn, or the property value of your house.
It on useless stuff. What about debt?
Mostly, yes. I mean, they're supposed to spend it on things like the police. They're not supposed to spend it on just random projects or silly things that they have in their head, and they tend to spend it on kind of silly things very often. But as you get older, you will realize how little you like taxes.
Yeah, he's way off base about that.
I come from a state called California,
Oh,
where monsters roam the streets and garbage is strewn everywhere. I think that Biden kind of makes up the rules as he goes. I don't think, unfortunately, he cares very much about the rules for being president. I think he just tries to do whatever he can do. Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia is my current favorite Democrat. He's preventing Joe Biden from doing a lot of bad things. So, guys, you just learn more than you will in all of college about how the government works.
If I was teaching a class, or if any other lefty was teaching a class, these guys would melt down over it. And they would say, this is flat out propaganda. You're indoctrinating these kids. You cannot be biased when dealing with kids this young. In fact, you should probably have it apolitical for kids this age because they're too young to really wrap their minds around a lot of the concepts. That's what they would say if a lefty was doing this. But since he does it, they got the cutesy little music in the background, and they act like, oh, this is fun and enjoyable and entertaining. So in terms of having some sort of objective standard or criteria as to when it's okay to inject, biased ideological politics into the minds of kids, there is none for them. When we do it, it's okay. When you do it, it's bad, it's evil, it's wrong. That is definitely the way they look at it. Now, beyond that, let's go to some of his points here. He says, Manchin is my favorite. Well, of course Manchin is your favorite because he's a Democrat who voted overall about 50% of the time with Trump. In the last portion of Trump's time in office, he actually voted 60% of the time with Trump. So, yes, you like Joe Manchin because he's Republican light. And also, I think more importantly, it's not just that. It's also that he's a giant sellout and corporate whore with no soul whatsoever, and he takes money from these giant industries and then kills popular legislation like universal pre-K and expanded child tax credit and lower prescription drug prices. Ben wouldn't say, hey, I like this guy because he's a corporate sellout, but that's exactly why he likes this guy, because Ben has this notion that, he supports an unfettered free market. But in reality, Ben is a corporatist. So in other words, when corporations donate to politicians, and then politicians turn around and deregulate those corporations or give them special subsidies, which is just corporate welfare, Ben supports that. He supports that. So he's not actually like a Ron Paul style free market capitalist where Ron Paul would say, look, I'm against welfare, but I'm also against corporate welfare. That is not Ben's position. Ben's position is to support the status quo, which is rank corporatism. He says, I love this one. Biden doesn't follow the rules. He sort of makes them up as he goes along. Now, is that true about Joe Biden? Yeah, that is true. It is even more true of Donald Trump, and it is even more true of George W. Bush. And Ben was one of the most staunch defenders of George W. Bush I've ever seen. I mean, this is a guy every step of the way, as Bush wanted to wage and did wage an illegal and offensive war against a country that didn't attack us. Ben Shapiro was there defending him and also writing articles about how collateral damage isn't so bad. In other words, killing innocent civilians, what are you going to do? It's part of war. There's nothing we can do about it. He was a staunch defender of torture. Torture, the same kind of torture that when it happened to our people in World War II, we sentenced the Japanese soldiers who did it to death. To death. So for Ben Shapiro to act like Biden doesn't really care about the rules. Yeah, true enough. Neither did Trump. Neither did George W. Bush. But you would never say it about Trump and George W. Bush because you're a partisan hack. And that's the difference between a commentator like myself or many others who are nominally on the left and Ben Shapiro, is that he's playing for a team. We are not. I'm trying my absolute best to call balls and strikes and be honest and upfront with my own biases and ideological perspectives. Whereas he is just no different than any random Fox host who's incredibly opinionated. There's no difference between, right-wing, alternative, new media, or independent media, if you dare call it independent media, because it's not really independent media, and mainstream media hosts on the right. There's no difference. No difference at all. He says, I come from California where monsters roam the streets. Gee, I wonder what he's referring to there. He's talking about homeless people when he says monsters roam the streets. Interesting way to refer to homeless people. People who might have drug addiction problems or might be mentally ill or might, have had a rough go of it in life. Maybe they lost a loved one. Maybe they couldn't keep it together and hold down a job or whatever it is. Ben describes these people as monsters. Now, by the way, even if I grant him that, which I don't, that they're monsters, okay, well, would you like to get them off the street? Would you like to do a housing first policy, which we know works because they did it in Finland and it was wildly successful? Is that what you want? You want to put a roof over all their heads? Look, you're framing it as monsters walking the streets is a bad thing. Okay, so there's an easy solution. We can get the so-called monsters off the streets with a housing first policy. Do you support that? No, he doesn't support that. He doesn't support that at all. So the thing that is the obvious answer is not a policy he supports. He just wants to shame and finger wag at these people who are down on their luck worse than anybody else in the country. That's what he wants to do. Monsters roam the streets. It's the dehumanization of homeless people. That's what it is. He says about the government, and this part is true. He says they're supposed to spend the money on stuff like the police, not little projects. Well, actually, I'm sorry. That part is not true. There's a different part that I'll get to, which is true, so hold on for that. But he says they're supposed to spend it on stuff like the police, not little projects. So yes, the government, of course, is supposed to, spend some of the money on police, but not supposed to spend it on, quote, little projects. That's not for Ben Shapiro to decide. That's why, on paper, what we're supposed to be is not just a constitutional republic, but also a representative democracy. So in other words, as long as we're not dealing with a constitutional issue, which is a right, which is off the table, then it should be up to the will of the people in what's supposed to be a democracy. But he frames it as like, no, you're not supposed to spend it on little projects. No, that's your opinion. But if the American people deem, if a majority of them say, hey, I do want to spend it on whatever this quote-unquote little project is, like universal pre-K, for example, then we're supposed to do that. But he is not in favor of that, which shows he actually is critical of small d democracy. When he says taxes are theft, of course, he's talking to a group of children, and he's making an extremist anarcho-capitalist argument that denies the existence of a basic social contract. Basic social contract. He had nothing to say about the idea of a social contract to these children, and so now they think, taxes are theft. As if there's no difference between theft and taxes. Unbelievable. But now let's get to the most important point, and the most interesting point, and the one that everybody's focusing on. Shapiro says, government takes all of your money and gives you very little in return. And then the kid says, in response to that, that's not true. And then later on, another kid goes on to say, he's wrong about this stuff, or he's wrong about a lot of this stuff, or whatever. Now, it's kind of gangster that a child very confidently was like, that's not true, to Ben Shapiro, just trying to fact check him in real time. But I will say, on this point, Ben is actually correct. That is true. The government does take a lot of your money and give you very little in return. The difference is, we actually want, people who are on the left want the government to give us stuff in return for our taxes. We want that money to be spent efficiently on things that are the basics in society, that give everybody a reasonable floor, that makes it so that there's a social safety net, and then after everybody's basic needs are met, okay, then you could have competition, then you could try to achieve some sort of a meritocracy. So we want that money to go to good things. The problem is Ben Shapiro does not. Ben Shapiro doesn't want your taxes to go to universal health care and universal education and, paid vacation time by law. He doesn't like those things. He likes to swat them aside and call them socialist and demonize them. So Ben Shapiro's solution is, let's just not have taxes, or not have, more than a certain low percentage of taxes, and let's not really have a basic social safety net. That's his solution. So he just wants the government to not really tax much at all, and then you get nothing. That's his solution. Whereas, my solution would be, you already pay, if you're in the working class, you already pay a decent amount of taxes. And I don't necessarily want to raise your taxes, but what I want to do is structure the budget so that the amount you do pay goes towards things that we all want, that we all care about, things that other developed countries already have implemented. So I think Ben's actually right when he says the government takes a lot of your money and gives you very little in return. But the reason that's the case is because our tax money is largely going towards what? Well, endless war, for example. Endless war is one thing. Wall Street bailouts, corporate subsidies. Like, that's the stuff our money is going towards, and I don't want it to go towards that. I want it to go towards universal health care and universal education, including higher education and paid vacation time by law and things of that nature. So I know they thought this was cute. I know they thought that this is, this is Ben teaching the kids or whatever, but seriously, stop and think about it. Do a little thought experiment here. If that was me teaching the class, saying the things that I say, how would they react to it? I have no doubt that would be on Ben Shapiro's show, and he would be saying we're rank propagandists indoctrinating children. Because when they do it, they think it's okay. If we do it, they think it's evil. And there is no objective standard. And that's like virtually everything else Ben Shapiro says and does. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.